Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Let us start this lecture with a thought process from ancient India. What we believe always is Pancha Mahabhuta. In the Pancha Mahabhuta, you will see that water, air, fire, earth and the Akash or the ether is included. So, this is a very great concept which is having lot of relevance not only for the environment and for our living beings, and it is related to also Ayurvedas and other things. This is a concept which we are always worry about, and water plays a very important role. And we have already spoiled the quality of water, and then as I had discussed in the last lecture that how to improve the quality of water using the traditional method. So, and we have already discussed in the lecture 5 about the how we can really manage the water conservation and also the water harvesting. And today we will take forward the discussion on this further, and we will be discussing about irrigation systems in ancient India. So, a question might be coming to your mind, what do you mean by irrigation? In other words, and why is irrigation required, and was irrigation system present in ancient India? If you recall that which I had told, that agriculture was the part and parcel of our system, and even today it is considered the important for our survival, because the food is an important component for living a life. And irrigation is basically a method of supplying the water to the agricultural field for the growth of crops. And therefore, India being an agricultural country, it is very important for us to have an irrigation system such that we can grow the crops not really depending on the rain waters. Of course, with present situation where there is a climate change and we need to now more depend on the irrigation systems, because the climate is very erratic nowadays. And India, as I told, is still considered agricultural country since time memorial and will remain for years to come, because we know that the food is very important, and that is why our scripture says annad bhavati bhutani prajjanat anna shambhava. And from the food the life has emanated, and one life sustains on basically taking the other's life as a food, and that is a very important one. And without water you cannot really think of cultivating the crops. So, therefore, it is very important and we need to have a irrigation system. And let me quote from Krishna Swami, who had made a statement that India was the international producer of agriculture and other wealth in prehistoric age. As I had told, agriculture is the only primary wealth of human being, but rest of the things are secondary wealth, and unfortunately today we are only running after the secondary wealth, not the primary wealth. But primary wealth is paramount for sustaining the life on this beautiful earth, not only by human being for any other living beings. So the Panchamut Mahabhut comes into pictures because those are the forces or the with which the mother nature tries to maintain the order in the entire ecology. So that's why our ancestors were very much worried about the Panchamahabhut and how to take care of it. And irrigation is a very important and essential, particularly when the rainfall is not sufficient or occurs in the wrong season. That is exactly what is happening today because of climate change, and it is very erratic. And by use of irrigation, we can at least overcome some of the problems. We can manage to get at least 2 crops in a year. Of course, in some parts of the country people do go for 1 crop per year, but today due to the burgeoning population then we cannot really depend on only 1 crop because land is shrinking, particularly the agricultural land, the population is growing. So therefore, we will have to go for the at least 2 crops or maybe 3 crops, provided we enrich the soil quality. That is important, and that is another aspect which you need to take care, not depending on the chemical fertilizer, rather the biofertilizers. The irrigation system in ancient India can be broadly divided into 2 categories even in modern time. One is natural, like you will have to use the water bodies and resources by the mother nature, that is rivers, springs, lakes, rainwater, ice caps and other whatever it is there. If you look at river, we call Sailaja, meaning is that which emanates or being originated from the mountain. But what we are doing, we are disseminating or removing the mountain from the various places to make a concrete jungles, very good roads like asphalt road and other things. Now that will affect the rain and affect the balance in the ecology or in the environment. And we have already spoiled lot of lakes and polluting the water and then not allowing the living beings to. So also the ice, as I had mentioned in the very beginning, ice is not being formed and it is being receded years after year due to the global warming. And there are artificial ways, of course, what man can make, that is like in terms of constructing the reservoirs, tanks, pools, wells, embankments, dams and canals and several other systems so that water harvesting can be taken place, and also you can irrigate the lands. But if you look at most of earlier days, people were depending more on the reservoirs and tanks and pools, even wells. But today these kinds of are not there, and of course the people are using dams, but those dams are basically meant for generating hydraulic energy for providing the electricity to the people. And irrigating purposes, for irrigation purposes, the dam size will be much smaller, particularly the height of modern dams are having lot of problems of silt deposition, and also it is a great threat to the people, and also it is stopping the water to a larger extent, and what is required for the agricultural purposes, because the areas nearby the river should be really getting dried off, should be with the water so that you need not to depend on the groundwaters. Let me show you a perspective. Let us look at the perspective view of the irrigation system being used in ancient time, and this is just I will talk about briefly, because just to give you some idea about what was happening. As I had told earlier, Mohenjo-daro and Harappan sites, you can get various kinds of people got various kinds of food grains like wheat, barley, sesame, peas, etc., which are being generated during the winter season and which really require irrigation system, and that was being accomplished with the help of barrages, dams and canals, which I had shown you in the last lecture, that how the people were making dams in the Mohenjo-daro in the Harappan sites. And beside these excavation sites in Rajasthan desert indicate presence of irrigation canals and irrigation systems. Seasonal damming of rivers and smaller branches helps in inundating the lands with the silts on a smaller rivers banks and enhancing its fertility for agriculture. But in the modern time, what is being done is that you are having a very big dam with a larger height, such that the silts are being deposited. It is not really getting into the field. As a result, the fertility of soil being getting spoiled with the crops, and earlier days it is being provided by the river. And it is not really a problem or a threat for the dams, because the dam size were small at that time. Pottery specimens of deep grooves, a large number of wells found at Mohenjo-daro suggest possibility of raising water for irrigation purposes. People have conjectured that it might be used for irrigation purposes. And during Vedic period, water was considered to be auspicious and utmost important. And Rig Veda classifies water sources into basically 4 types. One is rainwater, and the other one is water by digging the soil, like in terms of wells, and then reservoirs, tanks, and water oozed from the spring and river and streams kind of things. That is another one. So if you look at that way, they had classified the water into 4 kinds. And Vedic farmers were aware of 2 types of irrigation systems, as I had mentioned earlier. One is natural, which is directly take the natural streams and the rivers and then lakes, and other one is that artificially being done by the human beings, like in terms of wells, reservoir, tanks and dams, other things. So let us look at the water management at Dholavira, which is the basically Harappan sites. You can see this is the remnants of a dam on the rivulets, and these are all the stone which are being used basically to obstruct the water and keep it so that you can use it whenever it is required. And this dam site was very small, and these are basically a picture which was being conceived by the artist, and people have conjectured that the palisades, like fence of wood or metal stakes, might have given in this fashion, so that it will give you structural strength to the dam whenever the more amount of water being stored in that. So that is the thing what people have guessed or conjecture, but what was there is really difficult to judge at this moment. So let me look at the basically historical perspectives of irrigation systems. We will continue to discuss on this historical perspective of irrigation system. In pre-Mauryan period, irrigation from water of rivers, canals were used, and construction of dam was considered as act of auspicious and social duty. But today it is not, it is being considered as a job of a government to do that. But earlier days people, particularly the rich people or the villagers together, they will come forward and take care of the society. At that time society was living. Today society is basically dead. It is depending on the government all the time. So therefore it is like a master and slave situation today, and people are not using their creative power to find out solution for their problems, because there is a scientist or some other very special people, administration will do that. But earlier days people were finding out their own ways and means of solving their own problem. Even in certain villages today you may find some people who are really trying to do. They may not be educated enough, but they are having a lot of simple or practical knowledges which most of engineers or even the scientists do not have that. If you look at the great epic Mahabharata, in the Sabha Parva, Narada is asking to Yudhishthir, are large tanks, lakes constructed all over the kingdom at proper distance, without which agriculture cannot be really being carried out in thy realm of entirely dependent on the source of heavens. If you look at this, may be a mythological story, but it really depicts the situation at that time, that people were concerned for making the dams and then tanks and then lakes for water conservation and also water utilization. So, of course, the king has to take care of that and promote this activity so that water can be really be stored for the uses. If you look at the Hathi Gumpa of Bhubaneswar, this is basically about caves in which there is a picture about canal from Tosali river, and which was considered to be made by the King Kharava around 100 CE. That means the canal system of irrigation was there even 100 AD or C, whatever you call, because CE is basically common era, and it's long time back which is being depicted, and I guess that it is not that 100 CE, maybe it is much before that thing occurring, and people may have that knowledge which has been transferred from generation to generation. And the Mauryan period gave much more importance to agriculture and irrigation systems, and it has been talked about, or some people claim that Sudarshan Lake started by Pushyagupta, the governor of Chandragupta, and completed by Tusapa, the governor of Asoka. And as it was mentioned in Indica Megasthenes, because Megasthenes had visited in India at that time, he has written a travelogue and it has been mentioned in that. Beside this, Arthashastra by the Chanakya or Kautilya provides more importance to irrigation supported by the state and people. It is not that only people will do, state won't take care of it. It is the public private participation nowadays what people are talking about was earlier also in our country, where people will was involved in that, but today unfortunately the business people are involved for making money in public private partnership. But earlier days the people from the village, from the cities, the common people, they were involved in that, and there is a beautiful systems which I will be discussing how they are managing it later on. And in 150 CE, Sudarshan Lake got damaged due to flood, which was repaired during the reign of Rudradaman I, and during Gupta period this Sudarshan Lake was reconstructed during the reign of Skandagupta, incurring huge cost. People were knowing that it is quite important to have water and to harvest it. To harvest is very important, and to collect it and keep it for future use. So that is why they were spending a lot of money, and they were also maintaining it. Maintenance is a very important which was being felt by our ancestors so far water is concerned. And in South India, irrigation were carried out using smaller tanks and lakes during the Iron Age even, and later on it also continued. The irrigation system was really developed in a very organized manner around 100 CE as per the Sangam literary works is concerned, and it was done in a very meticulous way by the people, of course supported by the rulers. And Chola king Karikala constructed a great dam on river Kaveri around 100 CE by constructing embankments on it which exist till today. It is being of course being refurbished and then developed further and being used by a lot of people. And we will be discussing more about this great Anicut or the great dam constructed at that time, which has survived so many years. We will be discussing more about it. Beside this, during 700 to 1200 CE, there are several irrigation facilities were really developed by various rulers like Pandyas of Madurai, Pallavas of Kanchi, Cholas of Tanjore, Hoysala of Karnataka, Chalukya of Kallani and Kakatiyas of Warangal, and they were using tanks, inundation canals, channels, wells. They had built a lot of them to harvest the rainwater and also conserve it for the public use. And they had developed a lot of technology also at the time, how to do, how to construct and how to maintain it, and also a administration system or management system was in place at that time. The Rashtrakuta of Malkhed, Gulbarga in modern India, continued the Deccan tradition of irrigation system for rural development. Because if you look at the southern part of thing is really devoid of water and is arid area even today. So that is why they were developed a lot of technological and management skill too, and also water harvesting system. Most of irrigation works were initiated and funded by the state or the rulers, whoever will be there, but the maintenance part were managed by the village assembly during Pallava period. Of course, it was started by the Mauryan kingdoms, and in Arthashastra it has been mentioned how it has to be managed. Also, the private individuals were encouraged to build irrigation facilities and also maintain them. And during Cholas, Irrigation, a committee for maintenance work of irrigation system consists of 6 members were being formed, and who are supposed to hold office for 365 days only. That means basically for 1 year, and then their members will be changed. It is a democratic system which was existing. Always people feel the democratic system is only we got recently. It is as old as our basically, even if you go to Asaka period, even before that also democratic system was very much present in ancient India. Unfortunately, it has been not up to that mark what is going on today in this country. And beside this, there is another committee which was taking care of the sluice under the village assembly, in which is known as Kalingu Varium in Tamil word. I may not be pronouncing properly because I do not know that language. So, what I am trying to tell you that there was a system, technological system, like if you look at construction system they had developed, they have also developed a management system how to maintain the water bodies and irrigation system. So, during the time of Vikramaditya, 6 big tank was constructed in Katagari, in now it is Badami Taluk in Karnataka, for draining of excess water from a tank at a higher level to the tank of lower levels. So, that was being built at that time, and it was really very great how to take this excess water from a tank at higher level, the tank at lower level, so that you can fill it up. And Chalukyans of Kalyani had separate department for execution of maintenance of irrigation works, like which is known as Bharigraha Karana, and this is similar to what we are having. We are having today also irrigation department, right, in each state, and at that time it was there. And the Hoysala dynasty, which was around something 1000 to 1400 CE, also took interest in making rain fed tanks and canals and channelize river water to the dry lands for cultivation by digging the canals and other tanks. I will be showing you some very interesting things about that, how they were doing. And Ganapati Deva of Kakatiya dynasty 1199 to 1262 C constructed several irrigation works consisting of hundreds of tanks, rivulets as per the Hanmakonda Nirostya Kavya inscription. There is inscriptions in Hanmakonda which has been really reflecting how they had done and what other things. Besides this, Pakhal Lake, which is around 80 square miles, is located 30 miles away from Warangal, and this lies between the Krishna and Munari river. And this Ramappa Lake is formed by a ring of hills on 3 sides with a colossal bund or the dam on northern side, and well irrigations were also practiced at that time. Keep in mind that they were joining the rivulets and forming a lake, and today people are talking about joining the big rivers. My suggestion would be, don't tamper with the big rivers, rather you work with the rivulets, find out and get experience and what is the effect on the environment, then one can venture in that. So, now let us look at about dam in ancient India. A question might be coming to mind, what do you mean by the dam? Dam is basically a barrier, either natural or artificial, to hold the flow of water, so that it won't really flow on from the higher elevation to the toward the sea, which is generally at the lower elevations, and then water will be wastage unless we use it. So, dams are in existence in India from time immemorial. If you go to the Vedas, even we are having dams, so also the even Harappan times. The artificial water dams were mentioned in the Rig Veda, as I just told, and it was known as the Rodhas, which were having floodgates like Udha and Dura as per the Rig Veda is concerned. And how they had built and other thing, it is not really much being mentioned there, but however it has been talked about like as a terminology. So, dam along with the bridge is known as Setu in Sanskrit, Anai in Tamil, and in other local languages it may be different names. And as to Devi Purana, Pallibandh is basically dam or embankment, provides its measurements to be about 200 cubits. 1 cubit is equal to 0.45 meter, and this was basically meant for irrigation. The Kunal Jataka, which is around something 400 to 500 BC, mentions the dispute between the Sakya and the Kolia tribes for water distribution from dams across the river Hoini. This is located in Sivalik hills in Kapilavastu and Rupan Dehi districts of Nepal in Lumbini Jose, and this Lumbini is basically the place where Lord Buddha had taken birth and kind of things. So, if you look at, it is not that today we are having water dispute like between various states or from even international level, like we are having dispute with Pakistan, with Bangladesh and China for the water, but at that time also water was a dispute because of everybody wants to have water. And as I had mentioned earlier, the Sudarshan Lake cum dam in Kathiwara around 300 to 400 BC of around 278 acres is the earliest known reservoir that serves for 400 years without major repair. Of course, as I had mentioned earlier, at 150 CE it got damaged by the flood and was repaired by Rudraman I, and again burst out of around 456 AD, and again it was repaired and then by the other people. So, let us look at about the Grand Anicut, which is basically known as Kalanai also. The purpose of the dam was to divert the waters of Kaveri river across the fertile delta region for irrigation via channels. That was the idea, and of course, this I have shown here is the river Anicut, or the dam which is today existing, and these are the dams. And if you look at this colony was constructed with a stone and masonry, and its size is something 329 meter long and 20 meter wide, and 5.4 meter high across the main stream of Kaveri, and it was a very big dam. Grand Anicut, in their local language known as Kalanai, was built basically by Chola king Karikala around 4th century CE. It is one of the oldest water irrigation system in the world which is still in use, as I had mentioned earlier. The main function of the Grand Anicut was to keep the waters of Kaveri away from the faster and steeper Kolidam during the normal times, while allowing the flood waters to be safely transported from the Kaveri to the sea via Kolidam. That means, whenever there will be flood, the water will be passing through this dam to the river Kolidam, which is a faster one, so that it won't flood and do the damage to the people and also the fields. So that was a very great way of really doing that thing. And as I told, this Akhanda Kaveri, and it is bifurcated here. One is Kolidam, and this is the Kalanai river. Kalanai is a faster, is a dam here, and the Kolidam is the faster stream which goes to the sea, and whereas the Kaveri being bifurcated and then it inundated this place, which is a very fertile land. And this is the Grand Anicut. Kalanai dam was built to harness the water of the river Kaveri in times of drought, right. It will be irrigating this portion of the areas for. And before this dam was built, the water were flowing directly into the sea, and the system assured supply of water even in the summer season and avoided devastation caused when the rivers were in spate, like during flood. So that was a great act. If you look at it, has really done. And not only that, the ancient engineers of Bharat had created irrigation system with innumerable small reservoirs with network of irrigation channel, which we will be discussing little later on in the latter part, so that all these places will be having enough water to cultivate the lands for the food. So the area of irrigated by the ancient irrigation network is about 69,000 acres when it was built, but by the early 20th century the irrigated area had been increased to about 4 lakh hectares. It has been really been increased very much with the, of course, modern technologies. But let me quote from one British engineer, Baird Smith, who wrote that for nearly 25 years from the time at which Captain Caldwell's works were completed, which is around 1806, an incessant struggle was maintained against the increasing tendency of riverbed to silt up, because the Captain Caldwell was given the task of rebuilding this dam, repairing it such that it can be worked. Because of the war and then instability, it was not in use at that time. But however, he did some work, but it was not very successful, and the head and the many parts of the channel were periodically cleared of deposits by manual labors. Silt were deposited, and which was long expensive embankments were carried over across the bed of the main stream, so as to force a large supply of water into Kaveri branch. And all these efforts, however, were ineffectual, and the bed continued to rise, the supply to diminish, extent of the land under irrigation yearly decrease. As a result, the revenues was falling off at that time, and British people were very much worried because they are not getting money and what they have spent, and the condition of people was visibly becoming worse and worse, and about 1829 to 30 the crisis had been reached to a very mammoth level, so that they couldn't manage. After that, what they did, they really looked at the scriptures and then found out what are the ways and means, whatever the things, and they could do successfully. Let me talk about like what is this. This is a very machinery work, and this is a wire which is a curved shapes, and keep in mind that this is having a, this is the plan base, this is the elevation, and it is having a slope from the east side to the west side. I think higher at the western side, this is the western side, west, and this is the eastern side. Like then this is having a very well designed, if you look at in the modern days people do not do, but it is having, because it had a transverse slope too in the which is not shown here, a descent from the front to the rear, and which makes the some parts of a regular and some and smooth slope, in others irregular by 3 or 4 steps. If you look at this is also curved, and that helps really basically of taking the water from the Kaveri to the Kolidam and without really depositing the slip. Some people say that there is a secondary flows which makes this recirculation. As a result, the silt will be not deposited, it will be floated on the water. So that was a thing what some people are talking about. As a result, the overall is spread about 3 to 4 inch of thick of very fine and smooth chunam. That is a very important aspect of maintenance, to prevent the water from making the smallest impression on that. And that plaster was really spoiled during the war time or instability time. This plaster probably needed to be replaced every 5 years, otherwise it will not work. That is the maintenance which is required. Further, the front was ragged and uneven, which however is said to be an advantage of threw up a bed of sand in perpetual suspension for its defense, right. These particles or the sands will be there which will be doing. So that was a great things, and then later on the Grand Anicut's curved form, the transverse and longitudinal slopes of its crest transport significant fraction of the bed sediments over the Anicut during the floods. In fact, the first modification carried out in 1806 C by British engineer was made to the level of top of the structure, raise it by about 69 centimeters, without really understanding the dynamics of it or what is importance, because they did not understand how does that where works. And of course, they could manage to increase the capacity of the dam, but however, it created problems of silt deposition which was really very difficult to solve. And because they were not understanding that why it was done, and it is so complicated at that time for them to understand. Later on, the slope of side wares which I had shown from the point of bifurcation Kaveri branch is increase the speed of flow, hence its sedimentation carrying capacity, preventing any net aggradations. Aggradation means basically to a rise of river bed level due to deposition of sand or silt, and degradation is the other way around, it is picking up the sediments from the river bed. By really removing this kind of level what they had increased and maintaining the proper shape of the weir was done by the ancient Indian engineers, they could manage to really go for the degradation in such a way that the silt will not be deposited and it will be carried by the flow of water. And that was the thing they realized, and that is why the Cotton, who rather paid the tribute to our ancient engineer, he says that it was from them, the native Indians, we learned how to secure a foundation in loose and unmeasured depth. In fact, what we learned from them made the differences between financial success and failure. For the Madras River irrigations executed by our engineers have been from the first the greatest financial success of any engineering works in the world, solely because we learned from them. Them means basically native Indians which were there existing at that time. with this lesson about the foundation, we built bridges, weirs, aqueducts and every kind of hydraulic work. We are thus deeply indebted to the native engineers. But unfortunately, those engineers are not there today, because that era has gone and we are not talking about what these native engineers had done at that time, being appreciated by British people. And the ancient Indian engineers have created irrigation system, innumerable small reservoir network of irrigation channels, and which will now see that. But before that, let us look at the engineering marvel of ancient India. If you look at Kaveri bifurcation, the side wear slopes, which really helps in transferring the silt from the Kaveri to the Kolidam during the flood, and flood water transferred to the Kolidam, as I told, and Anicut facilitates the water during the drought regions. And it was really very unique because traditional automatic desilting mechanism was in place, drought water balance during the drought period, unique design of wear hydraulic, which is today even not being replicated till date. Unfortunately, I think more research is required to really look at those designs. And let me talk about this interconnected tank irrigation system, which was prevalent at that time, and this I have taken basically, which was present in Kolar districts, and which contains something 1500 tanks around seasonal river Palar. The river is in Kolar districts, originated in Kolar district and flow predominantly east into the Bay of Bengal between Chennai and Pondicherry. So, this is, if you look at, these are the bigger tanks which are having, this is having 11 large tank greater than 1 megameter cube and can hold the water 60% of the total storage water, whatever it will be filled in the 1500 tanks, 60% will be filled in 11 large tanks. But however, there will be 187 tanks can hold around 40%, like if you look at, of course, in this figure, if you look at that 187 tank can hold only 40%. And then what will happen in the semi-arid region under unreliable rainfall condition, the tank system diversity was found to optimize food security, because what is happening, like in the during this time, like when the water will be filled first in this smaller tanks wherever it is having, and when there is a large amount of water, then the large tanks will be filled, and once it is filled it will remain there, and it is quite sustainable. Sustainability appears intrinsic to the traditional Indian technology, and this is one of the examples which I can show you. And let us look at another very interesting hydraulic engineering system which was built around 100 BC. This is in Sriranga Berapura in Allahabad and district of UP, and it was excavated by B.V. Lal, historian, is a very well known historian. And if you look at, this is your river Ganga, which is flowing, and there is a channel which is being dug in, it is going through that, and such that whenever there is a flood, the water will be entering into the first tank, right. And this tank is basically known as the percolation tanks, storage tanks, and which is having size of 11 meter wide and 5 meter deep kind of things, where the silt will be collected, and from this silt tank the water will be clean water will be transferred to the second tank, which is a very big tank which is being lined with the bricks, right, and its length is 800 feet and width is 60 feet and the depth is 12 feet. After that it will be moving to the third tank, again water will be collected, it is having also brick line, and then later on from the third tank the water will be moved into the fourth tank, which is quite elaborate. Staircases will be there, and it is having a west weirs which will be there, and consisting of 7 spill channels and a crest, which is not shown in this figure, ensure that excess water flowed back into the river Ganga. That means excess water will be flowing into Ganga, as it will go to the little higher level than the water flowing in the Ganga. This is a very beautiful system which was being developed and designed in ancient time around 100 BC in UP itself. But unfortunately today it is does not exist, and it can really store water, and then those water will be percolating to adjacent area, and also during the other time one can use it. And let me talk about this inundated channel of Bengal floods. If you look at, there is a river here and there is an embankment, and whenever there is a flood, what is being done, that you cut this embankment and such that the river water will enter into the adjacent fields, and as a result what will happen, the flood waters will enter into field through inundated channel, and water brings rich silt and fish, and the fish fed on mosquito larva and helps in controlling the mosquito population, and at that time malaria was there in the this period, and that is being checked, and it was prevalent just before 300 years back and got destroyed during British rule, and then that is not there, which is a very simple system but very elegant way of doing. And let me talk about some of the other systems which is existing, like Johats. Johat is a rainwater storage tank principally used in the state of Rajasthan, where you will store water in the tanks, and then you can utilize later on. It can really charge the around that tank, and so that you can cultivate that thing. Let us now discuss about khadi system of 15th century of Rajasthan, which are still there, and people today trying to revive this technology of conserving and then harvesting the water. The khadi is known as also dhora, a designed by Paliwal Brahmins of Jalsmar, is basically an ingenious check dam to harvest surface water for agriculture based on the principle of harvesting rainwater. If you look at generally, it is a 100 to 300 meter long earthen embankment is being built. Over here you can see this is a embankment which is known as khadi band, and the water will be flowing. This is the catchment area. If you look at, this is the catchment area, and this is your khadi band, and the water will be being stored during the rainy season here, and there is a also a shallow dug well where the water will be recharged, and generally this embankment is built across a lower hill slope, so the water can flow very easily lying below the gravelly uplands, and sluices and spillways also being built to allow the excess water to be drained off. And the basic idea behind this is basically to harvest the rainwater on the farmland. These are the farmland, and use this water saturated land for crop production. After the rainy season you can use the crop here itself, so that this will be, and also it recharges the well, so that you can use the water for daily uses from the well. So, let us look at the cool irrigation in western Himalayas, because Himalayas is having a lot of problem for water, and most of the time the snow cap was there on the mountains hills, and the glaciers melt is diverted into head of a cool, the diversion channel. You can see this is a channel, and which will be can run for many kilometers, right. It will be channel will be there, and subsequently water gets collected in a tank. This is your tank which is being collected from, and from which water is distributed for irrigation purposes. And this was basically managed earlier by the people themselves, but unfortunately the government, particularly the government after independence, maybe before the British time, I do not know, but the government interfere in that, and then the whole system is collapsed today. Let us look at the bamboo drip irrigation in Meghalaya, where the systems were being used in areas where the bamboos are being used by the tribal farmers of Khasi and Gentia hills, and which is basically supplying the water collected from the springs or the mountains, and bamboos divert water from perennial springs on the hilltops to the lower reaches with the help of gravity. Basically gravity, the flow will be taking place automatically, and the water will be coming. These are bamboo, which will water will be going to these strips and then enter into the thing, and 80 to 20 liters of water entering the bamboo pipe system per minute gets transported over several hundred meters and finally gets reduced to 20 to 80 drops per minute at the site of plant, and so that they can grow the plants of their whatever they want to have. So, if you look at I have considered the irrigation system from various regions, from mountain region like Kashmir, just now we discussed, and we have also looked at the heavy rain regions. What we have talked about, bamboo, using bamboo they could manage to get water in the mountain, these regions and other places. There is a flood region in the Ganges and other regions which are inundated by the flood in the rivers. The Rajasthan regions which are being discussed, and Deccan Plateau, lot of irrigation system being arid region. If you look at each region was having different way of solving the water problems, and they are having different irrigation system. But today what we are doing in modern time, just put the dam and use the mechanical systems without really understanding that each region problems are different. It has to be solved differently using the indigenous technology, and which was there earlier, but unfortunately we have really spoiled in the name of development. So, let us look at how did our ancestors manage water harvesting and also water conservations. So, if you look at communities were providing volunteer labor and materials contribution for building these facilities for common good. This is a very important thing we need to learn, and the king and the local administrator were patroness for making the initial water bodies. But however, the community members were very much enthusiastic to maintain these facilities, conserve and protect water from pollution, ensure its equitable and fair distribution, which is not really possible today. That is a very bad part of it, but however they were doing of their own, because they were feeling they belong to this country. Today government is there and the people do not really feel belongingness to this country and their own area. They do not have a relationship with among the people. That is a very important aspect which you need to look at it. And glorious tradition of water harvesting by the villagers was in place, because they were involved and they are using their creative power to do that, and they feel proud of it, because the technology was with the people, not with the market forces, unlike in modern time. The community with strong support and encouragement from the state, and today state is different and people are different. The ingenuity and wisdom of our forefathers who made the harvesting of water, its management system, an integral part of native culture and community life. Today community life is missing, and we are all individual, we are not really a group. That is the important aspect what we can learn from them, and also the knowledge transfer from one generation to another, which is missing. Today we just whatever the western people come and tell us, look, these are the solution for you, we will follow. We are follow, we are not really creator of knowledge, new knowledge, and what is required for us, not for them. So non-commercialization way of solving problem of water scarcity was prevailed at that time. People are believing Bahujana Hitaya, Bahujana Sukhaya. That was our core philosophy with which we live as a human being. Today we are living like animals, only concerned about our own people, maybe to some extent of our family members only, not as a community. So, what are the lessons we can learn from ancient wisdom? We will have to solve the problem in an integrated manner, not that really the fragmented manner in which modern technology or the modern technocrats are thinking about. Adopt proper lifestyle respecting the mother nature. That is a very important point we need to keep in mind, because today agriculture is different, irrigation is different, and then quality of water is this thing. So, all are we are looking in a fragmented way, not in a holistic way. The meaning of sustainability in modern times should be re-evaluated in light of ancient public works and management practices which are being laid down by our ancestors. It is not sustainability for the name of sake, but it should be part of life. The technological development based on sound engineering principle integrated with the local culture and traditional knowledge system that are to be extended useful lives. Today people are using technologies which is having a very short lifespan, and active participation of community in solving the water problems is very important, because they will feel that they have done that. In water stress areas, development of an effective water resource management program is essential. It should be developed by the people, and as I told earlier, again I am repeating, the water technologies are to be built by the people, for the people, of the people, not by the contractor or not by the market forces. The local materials, local sustainable technologies are to be developed for developing water harvesting systems. So, these are the things we can learn, and we can learn a lot of things from them, and then we can revive some of the technologies provided we understand and also do research on that to make it effective as of now. So, thank you very much listening to this talk, and we can really use it if we can work together for this cause. Thank you very much.